Welcome back to the Founder Series, everyone. This episode, we're going to talk about the black box warning is gone. It's a 20-year correction in women's health. Before we dive in, make sure that you hit like and subscribe. It helps more women hear evidence-based midlife medicine instead of outdated recycled fear. Today, we're breaking down one of the biggest changes in women's health in 2 decades. The fact that the FDA has officially removed a black box warning from systemic hormone therapy, not just vaginal estrogen. If you've been told that hormones are dangerous, if your doctor refused to prescribe them, if you read the label on your vaginal estrogen and threw it out, if you've been suffering because of a label printed in 2002, this episode is for you. So I want to bring you right into that moment. So, this has been something that we all have been involved in behind a couple of my colleagues, where we were, sending petitions to remove the black box label from vaginal estrogen. And that's how that initially started. And so, all of us across social media signed these petitions and patients signed these petitions. And there was the panel back in July that proposed the reasons for removing the black box warning. And it was an incredible panel. So, we all kind of just been like watching and waiting and wondering what exactly was going to happen. So when I found out that, there was an alert that this was going to be discussed after this panel in July, I set like my alarm on the date, on the time. And, I wasn't at lecture. I wasn't home, wasn't traveling. I wasn't with colleagues, wasn't with friends. I was actually literally moving room to room, seeing patients. And so I made sure that, I was where I needed to be, hit play, recorded, so I could also make sure that I could catch whatever I had missed because I was in between patients. And like literally my patients found out as I found out. It was so exciting. And so, all of that hard work that everyone has done, this definitely could not have happened without everyone that was involved. So it finally just hearing the words that not only was a black box label finally removed from vaginal estrogen, it was removed from systemic hormone therapy. And so that, of itself was something that I don't think any of us were expecting at all. And so I sat there and was listening, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, stunned, relieved, validated. And I think in all honesty, just shaking your head that, all of those women that suffered without reason because they were never offered systemic hormones when they could have been. Not only that, but angry as a clinician that our education was completely wiped out. I started medical school in 2002. So, I think even just those things are important to realize that all of us clinicians during that time and thereafter have missed this education. So just something to ponder, because now here's the problem is we have all of these clinicians that now need educated. So let's go back for a moment and talk about what a black box warning actually is. So, let's kind of get clear on what this warning exactly means, because a lot of people don't necessarily realize the gravity of it. So a black box warning is the FDA's highest level safety warning, the one used when a drug has a known risk of serious harm, life-threatening events, significant mortality, or requires strict monitoring. It's literally a black border printed on the package insert, and it signals that this drug may cause severe or fatal outcomes and to prescribe with extreme caution. Things such as, chemotherapy agents, certain anticoagulants, and other medications with substantial overdose or organ failure use. So in hormone therapy, something millions of women had used, got this warning, it reshaped the whole culture of menopause care. And I still see this in practice, right? They read the warning, and I have women tell me all the time, yeah, my doctor did prescribe it years ago, I remember. And then I read the warning for vaginal estrogen and I crumpled it up and threw it away because I was scared. before the label was removed. And of course, I'm sure we have to wait for all the manufacturers to get through and into the new label. I had to tell patients, I don't even want you to read it. It's going to tell you probable dementia, risk of stroke, cardiovascular disease, heart attack with vaginal estrogen. I want you to crumble it up and I want you to throw it away. And can you imagine that they would trust me to say that there was a FDA label that was incorrect on their vaginal estrogen? So next, let's talk a little bit about hormone therapy and how it got the black box. And so it all came from the Women's Health Initiative. And so the Women's Health Initiative early data was released dramatically. Remember, it was stopped early because there was an almost significant increased risk of breast cancer and cardiac risks as well. So the whole new nuance, of course, was lost. The headlines were loud. They printed this out before even this statistician and analyst could get involved. And the FDA responded with the universal black box warning, all systemic estrogen and progesterone formulations, regardless of age, regardless of timing, and regardless of formulation, and regardless of route. Even though we know that the WHO participants were on older formulations, right? Conjugated equine estrogen and medroxyprogesterone acetate, the average age of those women involved were 63. They were more than 10 years past menopause. They were also high risk. They were not representative of early menopause or even perimenopause for that matter. Smokers, type 2 diabetes, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, and that warning really changed everything. So let's talk for a minute about how black box warnings get removed and how or maybe why this case was a little different. So usually removing a black box warning is not an easy task. The FDA typically requires a new large randomized control trial, data equal or superior to the original trial that caused the warning, an advisory committee review, safety monitoring and post-market data, public commentary, and years, often decades of evidence. So basically, if the WHO put the warning on, we want another WHO to take it off. I mean, maybe that's a little drastic, and no one is obviously funding a $1 billion menopause trial. So how this removal was different was instead of a single giant study, the FDA really relied more on, 20 plus years of consistent reanalysis, long-term follow-up, which showed estrogen alone reduced breast cancer risk, if started early, can also have other benefits for women. Evidence that modern hormone formulations are fundamentally different. Updated cardiovascular data supporting that timing window. Safety data from millions of real-world users. Acknowledgement that the black box itself created more harm. So this seemed like a really great time for the FDA to accept cumulative evidence instead of demanding another big WHO scale trial. So if you at all are watching the social media, you'll also know that there are some varying opinions about if this should have just been vaginal estrogen or if this should have been all estrogen and progesterone containing products, why some of the academics and some of the clinicians are upset over maybe how this occurred. So for some, you may have seen some of this pushback online, especially, like I said, from your academics or even just older clinicians. And here's some of the things that we've been hearing is that some of them are wishing really just for vaginal estrogen, right? Not this removal from all hormone therapy. Some argue that vaginal estrogen is clearly safe, which we know it is, and remove that warning, but keep systemic estrogen labeled as risky. They weren't ready to embrace the systemic data, worried about perhaps inappropriate prescribing. I think some fear over-prescribing or use outside the timing window, thinking things like, well, listen, now that that's taken off, no one's going to be scared to do it anymore. They're just going to put all these women on. Or non-evidence-based regimens, which, let me remind you, there's a lot of non-evidence-based regimens going on right now. So, or the resurgence of hormones for everyone. I think that's just a little bit dramatic. So I think there's more truth here that clinicians who prescribe responsibly already practice evidence-based prescribing, and the black box did nothing to stop poor prescribing at all. People who are poor prescribing are poor prescribing. The fact that women were suffering led them to things like pellets, led them to things like injections. And I also think that, there were careers that were built on the WHO era caution, right? Spending decades warning against systemic therapy. So this, I mean, I was one of those at one point, right? And so this really requires a professional pivot. And listen, clinicians are notoriously stubborn about changing their mind about things that they've learned, when really we should be like, well, that's not okay. And if you're in medicine, you know that these things are constantly changing. Things are constantly changing. That's why we go to conferences. That's why we have CME, because it's science and science is changing. Not everyone is comfortable with that. So, and I think there's some sense of misunderstanding about what the removal means, right? So I think removing the black box does not mean that hormones are risk free, that everyone should be using them, that all risks are completely gone. But I do think it means that this catastrophic risk warning is no longer supported by evidence. And in my opinion, it quite frankly was never supported by evidence. And I think it's going to open up the conversation at the very least. I mean, let's be honest, how many women actually read that and watch? I mean, we're talking less than 5% of women are on hormone therapy. So how many even know right now that the FDA took away the black box warning? How many even knew that there was a black box warning? So, clinicians did. Clinicians just don't know how to prescribe it. They need to know they need to have the education. They need to have the nuances. It's going to take a lot of education. And I'm here for all of that. I've already been involved in helping educate clinicians and medical students. And it's a great feeling. It's a great feeling because truly we want to help women. And for a lot of women, this can be life-changing. Now, there's still going to be warnings that are going to remain, right? Like it doesn't remove all warnings. Hormone therapy, like any medication, will still carry standard FDA warnings. We know that oral estradiol can still give a venous thromboembolism risk, any oral estradiol. But listen, it's a smaller risk with hormone therapy than it is with oral contraceptives or with pregnancy. And I'm not sure that everybody gets adequate education when they're starting somebody on an oral contraceptive or when they get pregnant. In all honesty, it does not apply to transdermal estradiol. That risk is very low, if at all. Stroke risk with oral estradiol in older women. Remember, years outside that menopausal, that 10 years of menopause with risk factors. And again, oral formulations and that late initiation. Any woman with a uterus as well should not be taking unopposed estrogen. If they are using estrogen, they need to use a progesterone to protect the uterus. And there are still things that you need to discuss. Gallbladder disease with oral estradiol as well can increase that risk. But again, it's the same conversation you should be having about oral birth control pills. Okay. Cardiovascular risks also with late initiation. So again, that's starting hormones 10 or more years after the age of menopause in your higher risk patients. And we talked again about the unopposed estradiol. But what is gone is that catastrophic severe risk of fatal outcomes framing that was never supported by the updated science. So what does that mean for women today? It definitely doesn't mean that this is a free-for-all. So this isn't a free-for-all, but it is a correction. It means the conversation around hormone therapy can finally be grounded in science, not fear, not politics, and not outdated interpretations. It means that women get their options back. This is really important. Women deserve having a very nuanced, well-informed, educated discussion with their menopause-trained clinician about initiation of hormone therapy. Going back to all of the positive things that this means is that women can finally have informed conversations and not fear-based conversations, that doctors can practice updated evidence-based medicine, but they need to be taught, right? That vaginal and systemic estrogen can be discussed without stigma. Both are safe when used appropriately, and women regain their autonomy. And they regain that because misinformation is no longer printed on the label. The other important thing to remember too is, and I think truly what this means is that, hormone therapy is safe and appropriate for the right patient. We've known this, but now the regulatory language matches the science, that this breast cancer narrative was incorrect. We know that estrogen alone lowered the risk. Now, the caveat to that is conjugated equine estrogen. We extrapolate data for the estradiol that doctors no longer can hide behind outdated warnings, right? I'm uncomfortable because of the black box, but we do need to give them some time to get educated because it is nuanced care, or at least be able to send you to somebody who can help. Barriers at pharmacies and insurance will really need to shift. This will take time, but they really need to do it. No longer is the time where I'm at least hoping that your pharmacist isn't going to say to you, you can't use vaginal estrogen and your transdermal estrogen together in front of everybody, right? These types of things need to change. They need to update themselves as well. And perhaps along with clinician training, we need to make sure that we're also training pharmacists. Webinars, that's what webinars are for. And I think that women can finally discuss hormone therapy without feeling irresponsible, right? Without hiding, right? They hide from it. They tell me all the time, I don't want to talk about it because my friends are scared. They ask me, why in the world would you take that? You know, it causes breast cancer. Literally, those are the words that my patients tell me. But what it can do for you is that, while if you're listening to this and, walking your dog or driving to work or wherever, you can sit across from your clinician and say the FDA has removed the black box warning and the data supports hormone therapy started within the first 10 years of the last menstrual period, that you deserve updated care, at least a nuanced discussion, right? So now you have leverage and data and the policy backing you up. So I think for me too, and I know I'm not the only one that feels this, again, as I think about this announcement, watched it in real time, and again, think of all of the women that were told that hormones were too dangerous, that were scared away from them, that they thought they had to suffer, that had recurrent UTIs, that had horrific hot flashes and night sweats, that broke bones, whose marriages may have dissolved because they were not offered that conversation. They were not offered an option. They were handed fear instead of facts. We're hoping that now marks the course of correction, that this isn't just policy, that this is liberation for midlife women, but just not midlife women, you guys, for our daughters, for our nieces, for women as they are growing and aging and then going into midlife. So this is going to affect my daughters. That's important. And I want to make sure that I also make the fact very, very clear that it doesn't take away from us doing this work in this space, that this is a huge deal, that it took everyone's support and that everyone should still be supporting it. That now we need to make it very clear that, yeah, you all deserve a conversation. Even if hormone therapy is what you choose not to do, you have the right to a discussion, a well-informed, shared decision-making discussion with your clinician. So if this episode gave you clarity, hope, or just validation of your frustration, make sure that you subscribe, share, and leave a review wherever you listen, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, if you watch this on YouTube. If you are a clinician wanting CME, you can do that through the Pinnacle podcast or the Pinnacle app. And if you're ready to build your individualized hormone, metabolic, bone health visit, if you just want a nuanced discussion without being rushed, if you want the whole entire picture, then make sure you visit osteopathicmidlifehealth.com and book your consultation. I'm Dr. Rebecca Hertel, board certified osteopathic family medicine physician and menopause practitioner, and this is the Founder Series. And I'll see you next time.